Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the afternoon regular council meeting of Monday, December the 13th. This meeting is being recorded live and is streaming on the District of Summerland YouTube channel at youtube.com, District of Summerland. All representations to council, written or verbal, will form part of the public record and be available to the public for viewing electronically or as a written record. Members of the public may access the meeting or participate in the following ways. Attend council chambers in person. Individuals who wish to attend council chambers in person may do so by registering in advance of the meeting by contacting the corporate officer at summerland.ca to ensure there is enough space in council chambers. I guess I don't have to read that if there's nobody sitting here. Watch the meeting live or recorded, again at the District of Summerland YouTube channel. If you haven't registered in advance to speak, you can comment on the public comment opportunities or during the public comment opportunities, time permitting. After I have provided everyone who has pre-registered with an opportunity to comment, the floor will be open to those in council chambers and those on the conference line. The conference line can be accessed by dialing 778-907-2071 and entering meeting ID 506-489-9374 and passcode 485186. Corporate Officer, are there any late items to introduce? No. Okay, thank you. Council, approval of the agenda is written. Councillor Van Elfen, thank you. Councillor Patton, all in favor? And a resolution to extend the meeting to 4:30 today. Councillor Holmes and Patton, Van Elfen, all in favor? Great. Adoption of the minutes for the Committee of the Whole of November 22nd, 23rd, 29th, and December 6th, and the regular afternoon meeting of November the 22nd. No changes there, anyone? Okay, Councillor Van Elfen has made the motion. Seconder, Councillor Patton, all in favor? Thank you. No delegations today, so we move into our first public comment opportunity. Do we have anyone? No, we don't. Okay. Good, we're already a little bit ahead of the game, time-wise. So the first of our business items, 7.1, BC Infrastructure Planning Grant Program, and I will pass this over to Lori Mullen, who is joining us via Zoom. Go ahead, Lori, thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The purpose of this report is for Council to consider supporting an application to the Local Government Infrastructure Planning Grant Program for funding support toward the Summerland Rodeo Grounds Master Plan. The Infrastructure Planning Grant Program assists local governments in developing well-planned community infrastructure that will improve public health and safety, encourage resilient communities, protect the natural environment while strengthening local and regional economies. The province of BC will provide a maximum grant of up to $10,000 for each approved project. The Summerland Parks and Recreation Master Plan key findings outline that the community identified the Summerland Rodeo Grounds is needing revitalization and recommends that the district undertake a master plan for the rodeo grounds, exploring community needs and possible uses for the site, servicing requirements and cost, and possible operating arrangements. This project has also been recognized by the Summerland Rodeo Grounds Equine Development Committee as an important priority. The Summerland Rodeo Grounds Master Plan has been identified as a 2022 project in the 5-year capital plan with a budget of $50,000. This $10,000 planning grant will help offset these costs. So staff are recommending that Council issue a resolution this afternoon to support the grant application, which is due on December 15th. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Lori. Council, any questions? Councillor Holmes.
Yes, thank you. I'm just wondering if we'll have the opportunity to review the scope of this master plan before it's put out. Specifically, I'm not sure there's a consensus that we would want to include a large off-leash dog park at the rodeo grounds. I think we need to discuss what's in it and what's not in it. And so my question is, to apply for this grant, do we have to have that scope set in place in order to apply for the grant, or can we figure that out later? Thanks.
Thank you for the question, Councillor Holmes, through Madam Mayor. We do have to give a high-level overview of what is included in the master plan as part of the grant application or the work that we're projecting to do. For that particular bullet, I could include that we may include the consideration of an off-leash dog park, but we can certainly, before we actually go ahead and issue the RFP to move forward on this project, I can bring the scope of work forward to council in a report to discuss the scope of work before it's issued.
Any other questions? Councillor Barkle.
Wouldn't an off-leash dog park, and I don't know if it's talking about large dogs or a large park, just be included in site optimization, utilization, servicing requirements and such? I mean, that's just one of the potential utilizations of the park.
Through the mayor to Councillor Barkwell. Yes, all opportunities will be explored. I guess the question is, do we want the consultants to do some specific work and direct them to look specifically and creating some concept designs around the off-leash dog park, or if it would just be high level, these are the type of opportunities that could happen at the rodeo grounds. So whether or not we wanted specific work done on that through the scope of work of the master plan.
Any other questions? Councillor Holmes, did you have your hand raised again? No. Okay. Could I ask someone to bring forward the resolution there, please, for submission of the application? Councillor Holmes.
That the submission of the application to the Local Government Infrastructure Planning Grant Program for funding support toward a master plan for the Summerland Rodeo Grounds be supported.
Thank you. Seconded by Councillor Van Elfen. Any further discussion? All in favor? That carries unanimously. Thank you, Laurie.
Thank you.
Our second business item is 7.2, Okanagan Food and Innovation Hub, expression of interest, land/building partner. And Councillor Holmes, I would like you to chair this portion of the meeting. I am going to recuse myself.
Okay. So, to Brad. Okay, go for it.
Thank you, Chair. So just before I introduce our consultant, I'll do a brief background of this project and where we're at today. So the District of Summerland has been leading the idea of a regional food hub project over the past 4 years for the purpose of advancing the agricultural sector within Summerland and the broader Okanagan region. The main aim of this project is to build the regional agri-food capacity and connect food and agricultural technology entrepreneurs to the right resources so they can develop successfully, commercialize and market new agri-food products, technologies, and also while redefining our regional food system, and also help agricultural communities in the existing food system become more sustainable, ecological, resilient, and economically robust. In July this past year, we were successful in receiving some additional funding to go towards the activities of this project for pre-feasibility activities to have us ready for higher level grant funding submission from the Economic Trust of Southern Interior, referred to as ETSI, to hire a consulting team and complete the following scope activities. The creation and management of an expression of interest process for a land and building partner, which is the topic of today's report. The confirmation of partnership of the land building partner for the food hub, and of the revision of the Food Hub business plan to reflect the new land and building partner and also potential phase one scaled down version of the hub. Following an invitational request for proposals process that was released and closed in September, we successfully awarded this project to Green Chain Consulting and their proposed project team. And Darren Stott is here with us today from Green Chain Consulting to present their process for the expression of interests of a land partner. And with that, I'll pass it on to Darren.
Thanks, Brad, and thanks, Council and Mayor, for having us along today to present the expression of interest for Food Hub Partner. I'm just going to set up sharing my screen, so just bear with me a sec. I've got some slides to show. Can I just check that everyone can see the slides? Yeah. Okay, so just going to go over the consulting team and then expression of interest process, how we evaluated the proposals and what our recommendation is, and then just some final last steps. So the consulting team, as well as myself, I work very closely with David Van Cedars and Janine de la Salle on Food Hubs for the past 10 years, and I've got some examples I'll show you later. Some of you may know Jane Campado, who did the original business plan in 2019. And then we brought on Tracy McTavish, who we've worked with, who's an architect, just to help us do some concept drawings as well. And she worked on a lot of agricultural projects. And these are some of the projects we've worked on over the past 10 years, most of them within British Columbia, some of them that are up and running now, and some of them outside BC as well. Some of them feasibility studies, business planning, engagement, and then even operations as well we've been involved with. So the expression of interest process. So the process was managed independently by Green Chain Consulting and the associates. And the goal was to identify a suitable location and partner for the Food Hub. So the request was issued November the 2nd with a deadline on November 25th. And this was developed using the South Okanagan Food Hub business plan written by Jane and her team. And as well as discussions with the district of Summerland. And we also visited potential sites and had some other discussions as well. The expression of interest contained an introduction to the project, Food Hub overview, including facility location requirements and features. And I'll go into further details of that in a minute. Proponent options, and then the EOI process and requirements, terms and conditions. So included in the EOI, there were some key location and partner requirements. These are the key ones. There were some others in there as well, but it had to be located in the district of Summerland. The facility in phase one, this is, we do have a phase two in the next slide. So when the Food Hub would open up, ideally it would like to be between 3,000 and 5,000 square foot. And like I said, this came from the original business plan that was done by Jane, as well as other Food Hub projects we worked on as well, just to ground it. Lease rate, including triple net costs between $14 and $18 per square foot. And then accommodate the following key elements: office, administration, and meeting space, minimum 2 washrooms, 1,500 square foot of plant-based food processing kitchen, space for ambient refrigerated and frozen storage, for food predominantly, food packing and distribution area as well. To have a minimum 5-year lease beginning no later than 1st of June 2023, with an option to extend, and then good delivery loading access of 2-level loading bay doors and adequate parking for commercial vehicles and visitors. Phase two, just looking into the future, ideally with the potential to expand. As we've seen other food hubs, they start off at a various level, and then as they grow, there's need for additional facilities. So an additional 3,000 to 5,000 square foot, so a total of 8,000 square foot, if not more, for the food hub. So that'll be expanding the processing area, the storage area, as well as any stored equipment. To have meeting rooms and classrooms for business accelerator, and then as well as laboratory facilities for product development and applied research. And then the evaluation criteria was broken down into a proponent profile, suitability of location. As you can see, we have the weighting on the right-hand side, building size and configuration, ability to meet site servicing needs such as water, power, sewer, and roads, access for larger vehicles, including parking availability, ability to meet local and provincial land use and zoning policies, especially if it was in the agricultural land reserve, financial development plan for construction and or renovation, proposed gross rental rate financial value proposition, ability to expand space to accommodate phase 2 requirements. So once the expression of interest was compiled, we then distributed that to 13 selected parties that we identified through the engagement that's been happening over the 4 years that Brent mentioned to before and all the conversations that has happened. We also emailed it to 97 selected parties and asked them to pass it on to their members or contacts to see if anyone was interested in putting in a proposal, as well as posting it on the district's website and social media accounts. After the deadline, we had 3 submissions, as well as 2 parties submitted a general letter of interest as well to be included within the food hub. And the party that was came up tops after all the analysis and go through the criteria was Okanagan Crushpad. They met the minimum criteria, but also offered additional benefits and therefore are a recommended party. And these are those additional benefits. So they propose to build a brand new facility. So that could be fully tailored to the final design specifications of the food hub. The facility will house at least 2 other parties that will likely use the services of the food hub and could create space sharing opportunities. Agricultural and viticulture production is already happening on the ALR site and could easily be expanded as the total property is 312 acres. The proponent has extensive experience in the construction industry and the food and wine industry. A potential exists at the site to establish retail market and agritourism opportunities such as tasting rooms, far tours, U-pick operations, etc. And so here's just a very high level diagram of the location. So on the left-hand side, we can see an aerial view where the food hub would be located, as well as other facilities. So as you can see on the right-hand side, the proposed food hub space at the bottom there. And then above that, Okanagan Crushpad is going to build their own wine operations and cellar on site. And then another business, Locomotive Food Delivery, also wants to have part of the building for their own packing. And then, as I mentioned before, the food hub space at the bottom there. And then there's plans for greenhouse production, but then there's also opportunities, I should say, for further expansion, even when it's needed. And this is very, very basic drawing and may or may not reflect what the actual final layout would look like. But just to give you an idea of the share of those different components. And so next steps would be after the council has considered this proposal, is to explore ways to reduce proposed lease rates by securing funding for a portion of improvements, so having the district cover some costs. So the team, in partnership with Community Futures, is already applying for various grants, and other food hubs within BC have been very successful to receive significant grant funding for their food hubs. Attract more tenants to co-locate at the facility as lease rates decline and more space is rented. So such as Locomotive, who also want a part of the building. Maybe there's other businesses out there that would also like to attach themselves to the building as well. And that would obviously bring everyone's lease rates further down. Initiate steps to make private section of Garnet Valley Road into a public right of way, which I think has been an ongoing discussion. Initiate conversations with the ALC to ensure that proposed site use meets ALR regulations, and we're relatively confident they do. And work, as I mentioned before, work with Community Futures and other partners on funding strategies. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We're taking questions now? Yeah, okay. Who wants to start? Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Can someone clarify to me the Garnet Valley Road right-of-way? Sorry, I'm just looking for that slide. Yes, initiate steps to make private sections of Garnet Valley Road into a public right-of-way. What private sections are we talking about? Thank you.
So through the chair to Councillor Van Olfen, for this large parcel that's owned by Okanagan Crush Pad, the section of Garnet Valley Road that actually extends through the parcel is not publicly owned by the district. So it's something that I think for any future development or subdivision that was to occur on this property, we would want to dedicate Garnet Valley Road formally through the process, and I think the owner would be willing to do that.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Councillor Barkwell.
When someone leaves a meeting because they have a conflict of interest, they usually state what that conflict of interest is. And I just wondered why our mayor, what her stated conflict was. No?
I don't know.
Oh.
Councillor Carlson.
Thank you. I'm just wondering about water. I know that this property comes up often about how many acres are on the roll versus how much is available. And I just wanted to confirm that they have domestic water as required, but also that there's a process in place so that if they need more water for their acreage, there's a ability to do that, or if we understand whether there's enough for that to expand, especially with greenhouses. Just to, before we go too far down the road, I know that would come up at the Ag Advisory Committee, and it has before.
Yeah, so,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Darren. You can answer
yeah,
that.
just in their proposal, district irrigation, domestic water lines across the site. So maybe that's something we could look further into just to make sure there will be enough.
Yeah, and if I can add on to that one, thanks, Darren. Through the chair to Councillor Carlson. Yeah, the proponent is, as part of their proposal, is indicating and building in the costs for extending a new water service onto the property, I think, as well as power to this facility to service the building. So that would be probably further reviewed at the application stage as to what would be a requirement for water servicing. Although we have recently upgraded the water service on Garnet Valley Road going up the valley, so we think we have enough.
So just to confirm then, I note here that the power is 1 kilometer away, and you say there's not necessarily enough water going to the property, but it would be part of the build. Just wanted to check in on the those costs. Are they borne by the district? Are they going to be borne by the food hub, the province, the developer? Or is that something that we're not necessarily getting into right now? I'm just wondering. I just don't want it to be on the district. Like, that's my question, I guess.
Yeah, that's a fair question. And the Okanagan Crush Pad has budgeted in there as their cost for the development of the building.
Go ahead, Brett.
Yeah, through the chair to Councillor Carlson. So what was provided to us for review was a sliding scale of costs based on the amount of square footage that was proposed to be required for the food hub for its purposes. So I think there is some flexibility in how those costs are shared, and also with the various tenants that might be using the facility. The proponent did indicate 2 other uses within the building that would be sharing those costs. So it's not quite yet determined as to what the final cost will be, due to the sharing of the space, plus the amount of space we may or may not need at the first point.
So it's just incorporated into the square footage of the actual space. It wouldn't be a upfront cost that we would help pay. Thank you.
I'll just ask.
Thank you. Just, do we know how many arable acres are on the roll? on this property. It says 312 acres. I don't believe it would be all on the roll, but I believe it's a 6 or 8 inch irrigation water main servicing this property. Prior to a vineyard, it was a hay production and ranching facility or farm, and now it's vineyard. So I don't think irrigation water is going to be an issue because they'd be using a lot less than they once did, that's for sure. But just be curious to know how many arable acres. Thank you.
Through the chair to Councillor Van Alphen, I'm not aware of that off the top of my head. But it is something we could determine.
Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, temporary mayor. Holmes. Caught me by surprise what I'm supposed to say. Conceptually, it all looks like a win-win and such, but I'm kind of wondering about the motion that's in our agenda. It says direct staff to enter into a partnership agreement. At this stage, aren't we just sort of looking at directing staff to, say, negotiate a partnership arrangements, which they bring back to council for our approval or discussion?
Through the chair to Councillor Barkwell, our next steps here are to revise the business plan as part of those pre-feasibility activities for this project, and also that will help us fine-tune the amount of square footage we'll need for the food hub, and then that will also blend into the negotiation process with the land partner as part of us next step. So we do see that negotiation process kind of ebbing and flowing with the creation of the business plan over the next step. I think that any tentative agreement we have in place with the partner will have to be conditional on higher level funding from provincial and federal sources. So it wasn't initially staff's plan to bring the tentative agreement back to council because a lot of it will be dependent on higher level funding.
Go ahead.
So I go back to what our motion is here because it reads to enter into a partnership agreement, and that's sort of like a too big of a blank check here. Perhaps when we make the motion, we should, and I'm looking towards our CAO and corporate officer here to some guidance on what that motion should look like, given the current status of the process.
Maybe we got through the questions first before we think of a motion. Councillor Carlson.
Thank you. I'm just a little bit further on the actual process. I know that the province is, the initiative Feed BC is, this all fits right into it, and there's food hubs that there's been 3 or 4 rounds now of intake, and I'm wondering if we have any indication from the province when that next intake might be. I know the Ministry of Agriculture is a little overwhelmed with recovery right now, but I'm just wondering, like, do we have a timeline? Do we have an expectation, or is it simply trying to put something in place so that if they do open it again, we're ready?
Through the chair to Councillor Carlson, and I'll try to answer this. And Darren, if you have any additional information, feel free to jump in. Right now, there is no current intake for additional food hubs across BC, and there won't be until at the earliest possible. It would be in their next budget season, which starts in April 1st of 2022. So we want to be ready for that time period in case there is additional funding opened up April of next year. You're right, though, priorities may have recently changed by the province. So our desire at the staff level is to be ready for when that funding does get opened up. But things may change, and as it did with COVID 2 years ago with this project, when COVID, we also had our ducks in a row at that point in time, but COVID changed the priorities from the provincial level.
I'm just going to ask a bunch of questions if you don't mind. So I'm having a hard time conceptualizing what this is all going to look like. The original thinking was that we'd be looking at an existing building because the thought was having a new build would be cost prohibitive. So I'm wondering, is the food hub in this proposal in addition to a building that's going to be built anyway, and that's why it's cost effective, or why is it all of a sudden cost effective to have a new build? So that's one question. And the other, I don't really understand the whole thought process behind subdividing this property lot, and who then would be the owner of this new subdivided lot, and what crush pad's role will be in the whole food hub once it's all established.
I think the first question I'll answer, and then I think Darren, you can maybe jump in on the thought process for that first question, and maybe I'll answer the second one first, if you don't mind. So the subdivision process, so that's not necessarily a requirement for the food hub. This is all currently one parcel. It's 312 acres in size, but the proponent did recognize that Garnet Valley Road is currently crossing that private property. So they offered in the proposal to deal with this issue by going through a dedication of that road right away to the district. So the subdivision is not to the benefit of the food hub or crush pad, but primarily the District of Summerland's needs to protect Garnet Valley Road in the future. And there's no additional lots proposed other than to dedicate the roadway. So that's the second question. The first one, with regards to a new build, I think you can see from that plan that was presented by Darren that there is 2 other users proposed of this facility, and I'd say about 50% of the floor space, if not more, is proposed to be utilized by Okanagan Crush Pad for their own operational needs. So it's perhaps a good timing for us in the fact that they are looking to expand their operation, and they were able to perhaps come up with rental rates that were more conducive to making this work versus an existing facility, if that makes sense.
Okay.
Darren, anything else, Darren, from your perspective?
Yeah, no, I think you're right. I think because it's going to be built with other users, that it allows to bring the lease rates down. And then I wondered if the question that Councillor brought up was regarding the subdivision of the building as opposed to the subdivision of the road. Was that what you were referring to, Councillor? Oh, okay.
No.
Was the road. Okay. Yeah. So the building would be owned by Okanagan Crush Pad, and then all the other users would just be leasing the portions of the building.
Okay, so in the past, we've talked about different governance models, for the food hub, whether it's going to be a private partner or whether we're going to lead it. And so I guess, has that decision with this, this proposal coming forward the way it has that decision then been made that it's a private partner? I'm still trying to understand what the governance model would be, and then are we basically saying it won't be a municipal-led facility? I'd like to have a better understanding of that. Ideally, I'd like to be able to see the proposal, and I don't understand why we're not given the proposal itself.
I'll answer the first question there, and I'll leave it up to the corporate officer to talk about why the proposal wasn't viewed by council. But the first question was with regards to, sorry, just refresh my memory there, Councillor.
Just on the governance model.
Governance model, thank you. Yeah. So that is part of the business plan, revised business plan activities of Green Chain Consulting, is to go look through our current business plan and look at the governance model options. And it's still to be determined what that governance model will be. I think there's an opportunity to look at different unique types of arrangements with the land partner if we know who the land partner is. I think primarily, there's, like I said, there's different options right now for governance. It could be a cooperative, could be a not-for-profit that leases the space. It could be a collaboration of private entities that perhaps we're not even having to be involved in down the road. We're not really too sure yet what that's going to look like, but that's part of the next stage activities for Green Chain Consulting. So maybe, Darren, if there's anything you want to add to that.
Yeah, no, we're right in the middle of that. And funny enough, the consultants were discussing that this morning, and there's various criteria that will go into defining what that governance would look like. I think the key one really is funding and financing and what different governance structures can access, whether it's not-for-profits or co-ops or for-profits, like you mentioned before. I think that the council was asking what involvement the district was having with the governance structure or ownership of the food hub. Correct me if I'm wrong there, but we've been directed that the district won't be running the food hub. I think that's been a clear directive, whether it's a co-op or not-for-profit. So I think that's something we do know.
Councillor Patton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So realistically, the district at this point is just a vessel to help the Okanagan Crush Pad maneuver with the government and to get this food hub up and running, and to help set rental rates for the parties that would be interested in using the space. But then we would be backing off, and realistically, it would be a private entity that would be running with it after that point. Am I kind of getting the gist?
Yeah, I think at least from staff's perspective, we feel like it's not a primary service deliverable that we want to maintain in the long run in terms of maintaining a food hub. And there's looking at other food hub projects that are already in place across BC. There are very few that are actually municipally run. They're either run by a not-for-profit or a cooperative or a for-profit entity that's running and getting direct funding from the province for a for-profit entity to run this food hub. So you're right, Councillor Patton, we want to be a vessel to have this food hub established in the District of Summerland to the benefit of our agricultural producers as well as regionally. But we don't see it as primary operation. And like I said, it could be a for-profit or it could be not-for-profit as well. It helps.
Excellent, thank you.
Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So we're looking at, 312 acre property. What's the subdivision for the food hub? How many acres is that to subdivide that off? Do we know roughly?
So to the chair, to Councillor Van Elfen. So we're not proposing to subdivide the food hub land. That's what would stay within the Okanagan Crush Pad property, and the subdivision process would only be for the highway for Garnet Valley Road.
Thanks for the clarification.
Yeah, no worries.
I'll take another question then. So it's mentioned that we'll need to initiate a conversation with the ALC to ensure that it meets ALR regulations. Haven't we had any of those conversations already? We must have some idea, and if not, shouldn't we be doing that before we proceed too far down the road?
We will have further discussions with the ALC, and right now we wanted to make sure that this is on the right path with council for this location. We are pretty confident that we will be able to meet the requirements of the ALC's land use regulation, which requires 50% of the produce that's being processed within this facility being from the farm itself. And Okanagan Crush Pad as well has further confirmed to us that even with the food hub at a certain square footage, they're going to be well over that 50% already for their own needs for wine processing. And if you look at the whole facility as a whole, not just the food hub, but the whole facility for all the users, we should be able to get over that 50% threshold. But we do want to confirm that with ALC as a next step.
Other questions? Somebody want to bring forward a motion? Councillor Pat?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. That the District Council direct staff to enter into a partnership agreement with Okanagan Crush Pad on the placement of the Okanagan Food and Innovation Hub, OFIH, at 26405 Garnet Valley Road.
Do we have a seconder? Seconder, Councillor Van Alphen. Any discussion? Councillor Barkwell?
Well, I go back to what I said earlier. I'm not prepared to approve a partnership agreement that I haven't seen. I would approve a motion that said, you know, to prepare a partnership agreement to bring back to council for discussion or something like that. But I don't think we can give the staff the authority to enter into a partnership agreement, carte blanche, without even knowing what it's going to come back and look like.
Councillor Carlson?
Thanks. I just have a couple of things. Comes back to the question of water and how many acres are on the roll. I just want to ensure that, you know, going forward and down this line, regardless of if the food hub goes there or if it's simply crush pad and locomotive, or if it, you know, if that operation is expanding, I think it's important that what is there is being used, and if they need more water, that they apply for that through the process that we have in place. I think it's very important. And I had another question and I forgot, so I will dwell on that for 1 second.
Okay. Anyone else? Oh, go ahead, Director of Finance.
Through the chair, yes, I can. I just pulled up the agricultural roll or the irrigation roll, and there are 65 arable acres on that piece of property. So if they wanted more, they would have to go through the process of putting in a request and the water modeling and all those types of things being done. But that's currently on the roll to 65.
Thank you very much. I remember my other question, or it's just a clarity, I think. The District of Summerland, other than hiring Green Chain and going through this process, isn't investing any more money towards this project at the time. It's simply conversations, staff time, and what's already been dedicated to ensuring this process gets to a point where we can then pass it over to provincial grant applications, yes?
And through the chair to Councillor Carlson, yeah, thank you for the question. That is pretty much what our activities have been to date and continue to be moving forward, is to get us to the spot where we're ready for higher level funding. And so yes, the ETSI grant provided us the ability to hire Green Chain Consulting, but any commitments for the partner will be contingent on that higher level funding.
CAO.
Thank you, Chair Holmes. Also just looking at our Director of Finance, but I'm quite sure there's nothing in the 2022 budget for Food Hub currently allocated by Council. It's just the 2021 piece that we had identified, right, Dave?
Correct. Just the seeded or grant funding, just wrapping that project up is the only thing for the Food Hub in the 2022 budget.
The RDOS did approve $50,000 to go to the food house, so I do think we do have some responsibility to be accountable to them, because those are our taxpayers as well throughout the regions. Myself, I agree with Councillor Barkwell. I think that you know, I think it's I like to see what we're getting ourselves into before we commit totally. I like to see a bit more transparency in this whole process. I think we owe it to our funders to provide more transparency, and I just like have a better idea of what it's all going to look like. Any other comments? Councillor Barkwell.
Well, now that I believe I might have a seconder, I'll propose an amendment to the motion to say that the amend the word enter into a partnership, or the word enter to negotiate a partnership agreement with the Okanagan Crush Pad for council approval.
I'll refer to our corporate officer if that's acceptable, if that a completely different motion or not.
I believe that the person who first or seconded or moved the motion would have to amend it. So you could consider, we do have a motion on the floor. If council wanted to vote or consider that one, we could put a new motion on the floor that says that council directs staff to negotiate a partnership agreement with Okanagan Crush Pad on the placement of the Okanagan Food Innovation Hub, OFIH, at 26405 Garnet Valley Road, and that council directs staff to report back the draft partnership agreement with Okanagan Crush Pad for council consideration prior to execution.
Councillor Pelton?
Mr. Chair, I will fully go with what our corporate officer has just said.
Okay, and Councillor Van Elsen is okay with that? So we vote on the amendment first, or corporate officer, or is that? I don't know sure what we just did.
I would recommend that you vote on the main motion that is on the floor. So that is the one that Councillor Patton moved and Councillor Van Elfen seconded. And then if that one is not passed, or if it is, I would vote on the one that I just read out.
Okay.
Or put forward, sorry, I wouldn't say vote, put forward.
Okay, so we vote on the original motion that was first introduced. Yeah, we're all clear as mud on that? Yeah, okay, so all in favor? Oh, that's 0. All, any opposed? That's Councillor Van Elsen, you're opposed? Okay, so that's 6 opposed. And then the second motion, Councillor Patton wants to introduce what the corporate officer just said. All right. Well, he's very keen. He's keen. Councillor Mellison seconds. Any discussion on that? Okay, all in favor? That passes. Any opposed? None opposed. Okay, and if somebody wants to find the mayor, I'd appreciate it.
Well, she should say so. She has a business interest or business relationship or something.
But that's, I'm almost positive that's what it is. She takes that lower section from Bedford Farm.
Doesn't matter.
No, I know. Good.
Thank you, Councillor Barkle, or Councillor Holmes. Thanks very much. So on to 7.3. Proposed 2022 increases for water, sewer, and electrical rates. And this is for Dave Svetlichny.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. There is a presentation. If we can get it up, please, there. Perfect. So over the past few months, staff have been working on the 2022 water, sewer, and electrical budgets. Council reviewed and deliberated the proposed budgets on November 23rd and directed staff to present the proposed budgets and rate increases at the December 2nd, 2021 virtual public open house. The presentation has received 26 views on the district's YouTube channel, and to date, we have not received any public comments. The proposed rate increases include a 5% increase in water rates, a 4.21% increase in sewer rates, and a 2.51% increase in electrical rates. Next slide. The proposed sewer operating budget for 2022 is $3.2 million. Now, in order to balance the budget, a rate increase of 0.71% was required to cover operational increases. The proposed 2022 capital plan is just over $1 million and includes 7 projects. Next slide. The proposed water operating budget for 2022 is $6.4 million, which generates a small surplus of just under $29,000. On the capital side, our 2022 plan includes $6.56 million worth of capital expenditures, and that it covers 11 different projects. Next. The proposed electric operating budget for 2022 is $13.68 million. Now, in order to balance the budget, a rate increase of 0.76% was required to cover operational increases, primarily driven by a Fortis rate increase that is being passed on to the district. The proposed 2022 capital plan is $6.56 million, and that includes 9 projects. Next. So based on the proposed rate increases, a typical residential home will see monthly increases of $8.42 or $101.14 annually. These rate increases, 5%, the water 5% is strictly for asset management purposes. On the sewer side, 3.5% is for asset management, and the 0.71 was for the operational deficit. And on the electric side, 1.75% is for asset management and 0.76% to cover an operational deficit. And that concludes our, one more slide. So the following resolutions are being brought forward for council consideration. Thank you.
Any questions on this, council? Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question through to our Director of Finance. I know it was told to us at a budget meeting, but if maybe you could repeat, how much will this cost the average homeowner in Summerland per year on the average home?
2 slides, Greg. It was $101.14.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions? Councillor Carlson.
I know your favorite word of 2021 is inflation. I know we haven't really talked too much about that when it comes to this budget. Is that something that we are going to be having to talk more seriously about in 2022 based on what we are seeing currently? Or is it somewhat incorporated into what we're talking about right now?
The budgets that were presented and the rates that are being proposed do take into account inflationary pressures. When we get to the general fund, what I've been seeing is those pressures are more severe than in the utilities. So when we get to our general fund budgeting in early January, I think council will see those types of pressures being a little more out there than these budgets.
Any other questions? Could I have someone bring forward the resolution, please? Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That the Water Utility Water Rates Amendment Bylaw number 2021-054 be introduced and read a first, second, and third time, and that fees and charges bylaw amendment electric and sewer fees bylaw number 2021-053 be introduced and read first, second, and third time.
Thank you. Seconder, Councillor Barkwell.
I have a question.
And a question.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This bylaw just sets the fees and such and isn't really setting necessarily the budget, correct? Because what brings it to mind is we never really finished discussion on the contribution to the general fund. And if we reduce that contribution to the general fund, it would mean putting more money into the surplus for electric fund, and that's a budget item, which is separate and apart from the rate increase. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Okay, any further discussion? Call the question, all in favor? Any opposed? Okay, that's unanimous. On to 7.4, solar and storage project, de-scoping options. Graham, you are introducing this, thank you, and then Jeremy.
Thank you, Your Worship, and we'll just load up the presentation here. I'll deliver the first few slides, and then I'll hand it over to our Director of Utilities, Jeremy Storgold. So the first purpose of today's presentation is to provide council with options for reducing the scope of the original solar and storage project and to determine next steps related to a possible revised project for consideration by our grant funder. We are seeking feedback from council on options which have been prepared by staff with support from our owner's engineer, ATCO, for this project. Next slide, please. Next slide. When we get there, something's gummed up, but I'll start talking as then the slide changes to background shortly. With regard to the background on the project, on November 22nd, Council received an update on the solar and storage project procurement, which had closed on September 7th. The results from the request for proposals for this project revealed significant cost challenges in the solar and battery energy storage system industry due to the COVID-19 pandemic and other related factors, with the lowest bid to execute the project within the original vision and scope of work coming in at approximately $4.4 million over budget. As a result, Council provided us direction to explore provincial scope reduction. Following that direction, we have counseled the RFP and notified the proponents, and we've prepared 4 options for Council's consideration to de-scope project, but to do so within the original $6 million budget. The options were developed fully in concept, and then the financial considerations were calculated, as well as the anticipated construction timelines. As will be discussed, all the projects have a positive rate of return, as well as a net present value that is positive. However, the timelines for construction have revealed that only options 1 and 2 that we'll be talking about today have the likelihood of being completed within the grant funding program timelines. Next slide, please. And that's an important consideration. It should also be noted that Council, if we were to proceed with any of the 4 options, further engagement and discussions would be required with the funder to determine if the project is major or minor in scope. Should a change be considered, and that consideration is minor by the funder, through the funder's technical committee, then a decision can be made fairly quickly, which we anticipate to be about 2 months, whether that project can in fact proceed. However, if the change in scope is determined to be major, it is forwarded from the technical review committee to a formal management committee comprised of representatives from UBCM, the provincial government, and the federal government. This is a more time-consuming process, and a minimum of 3 months is anticipated for that. For the purposes of today's discussion, as each option is presented, we'll indicate our best determination regarding the likelihood of an option being considered minor or major. And now over to you for this slide also, Jeremy.
Thank you, CAO Stat. Hello, Council. So as you saw in the Council report, option 1 involves de-scoping the solar completely from the project, meaning the solar panels and associated equipment would not be installed. This project would focus on the battery energy storage system, or as we call it, a BESS, of the original concept. This approach would remove the complexity and associated costs of the solar, which is projected to bring the project within budget. The adjusted project would focus on peak shaving benefits rather than producing power from our solar resource here in Summerland. Batteries would be located on lands held by the district, and the project would create savings by charging the batteries from energy available from our wholesaler on the existing electrical grid, Our stored energy would then be used to partly supply our customers during peak power times, in turn lowering our overall power demand as a community. This is called peak shaving, and the method reduces our district demand charges. The equipment for this option is envisioned to be located at a different site. We note for council that this BESS-only option requires a significantly smaller footprint than the original project. As such, and because of scheduling pressures, we are suggesting that staff select a location for this project. A project of this size can be contained within a couple 40-foot sea cans, plus some electrical connection equipment. We note that if council would like a more engaging method to locate the BESS, then the project schedule would be at risk. As such, it is assumed that staff will be permitted to use their sound professional discretion as to where precisely the site would be located within the district, if council was to choose that option. We have had ATCO, our owner's engineer, review and recommend a sizing range for this project. So this is a battery-only project. And with the recent procurement that we have done, ATCO's suggesting to us that a 1.5 to 2 megawatt 4.4 to 5.4 megawatt hour draw capacity would be the size that we would go with in an RFP. Oh, able to. Just waiting for the next slide here. There we go. So pros and cons. We'll cover the pros first. So with a battery-only project, there's a lot less civil work to be done. We don't need 5 acres of panels and associated civil work for those panels. The design is simpler and the execution is somewhat simpler. With the battery-only option, they're almost a drop-in-place sort of purchase. There's fewer unknowns for the solar and battery control systems. So those two technologies are likely different vendors, et cetera, and we do have to have them talk to each other properly and work together. So that's one thing that we will not need to do on a battery-only project. The batteries take up, of course, a smaller footprint and can be placed potentially near a substation or some other fenced area here in Summerland. We have the peak shaving cost savings still, and the schedule is still achievable within the grant funders' timelines, and that is considering 2021 market conditions. So for cons, no power generation from solar as originally envisioned. It uses energy from the grid for heating and cooling the batteries. This is a con. It's not considered a renewable project at that point. There's no renewable generation, so we're actually taking power from the grid and we're using that same power back onto the grid. There are losses associated with doing that. And we expect that the grant funder would consider this a major change. Next slide. In terms of the grant impact, this option would likely be considered a major change in scope due to the elimination of the solar element and potential change in site location. However, further discussions with the funder would need to be. The anticipated project completion date for option 1 is January 11th, 2024. So basically right at the end of 2023 into the first year of 2024, which does fall within the timeline parameters of the gas tax program. However, the funder has indicated that it would be desirable to complete the project by September 2023, 4 months prior. Should council wish to proceed with this option, staff will clearly identify the anticipated completion date for the funder. And although unlikely, this timeframe may impact the funder's decision if they have any concerns regarding the district's ability to deliver the project or expend all the funds in the time allocated. In terms of the financial analysis for this option, the technical specifications have been estimated in order to be contained for the project to be contained within the grant funding of $6 million plus our $980,000 contribution from the district, plus a 25% contingency. As this option includes removal of the solar costs, the BESS can be constructed to a level similar to that originally anticipated, but the footprint and civil scope is reduced, allowing for additional alternative uses on the footprint initially reserved for the full solar plus battery project. In this modeling, we assumed a 2% year-over-year increase in our wholesale costs for electricity, and the IRR for this project is about 24% with a payback of about 4.5 years, as you can see in that table. And that table is available in your council report. So onto the schedule. So just to describe this chart a little bit here. So working at the top, we have the start of the project with council approval for an option today, December 13th. And then as we move down the chart, the timelines get further and further out, all the way to the project completion. So to develop this project schedule, we used our recent experience with the RFP processes that we just went through. So this is copying those timelines into this schedule. They're a little shorter in regards to the RFP development than what we went through last year, or earlier this year, pardon me, because some of that work is already done and can be reused. I just want to point out to council that the completion date here is January 2024 for this option. Oh. Three more options to go. Sure. So thanks, Greg, if you can get us to option 2 there. So this will bring us to option 2. Option 2 is the most straightforward option that we're presenting to council today. It's both the solar and BESS components are still part of the project. They remain in scope at the same location, but at a reduced size. Our owner's engineer has reviewed this option and has once again recommended a sizing range for this, and that's at 0.4 to 0.6 megawatts for the solar project, for the solar component, and 1 to 2 megawatts, 2 to 3 megawatt hours for the BESS system. In addition, as this option reduces the footprint of the original solar and battery project, there is the potential to implement a raised panel design feature, such as including panels over parking spaces or park areas, further integrating with the eco-village concept. If this design element is pursued, it will be included in the RFP specification to ensure it meets the project budget when we go for RFP. Integration with the eco-village would be showcased in the funder submission. However, it may be viewed as a hindrance as it would increase costs and is only an aesthetic design feature. It was not in the original contract with the funder. Thanks, Greg. So pros and cons for this option, starting with the pros, keeps the original vision of the project intact. So it's very similar to the original project. RFP will be mostly reusable and with a reduced scale. Site has already been deemed suitable for the solar and battery installation and will not require additional studies. Smaller footprint of equipment requiring less civil work, minor scope change for proponents. They could reuse potentially a lot of their bid. We can reuse a lot of the bidding material, the RFP material, and it's complementary to the eco-village project. Cons, less power production from the solar. May still want to proceed with original civil work to prepare for future expansion. Smaller system may introduce more bidders than the original design, which would potentially slow down the bidding process. Peak shaving will be reduced for the battery system. A reduced project, this option still encumbers the site location, which may be desirable for other projects, although it will be a smaller footprint. The raised panel design will come at an additional unknown cost at this point. In regards to the grant, as this option is similar to the initial project by including both solar and BESS components at the same location, it's anticipated this would be considered a minor change by the funder, but that would be up to the funder to determine. As in option 1, the anticipated timeline is set to occur within the parameters of the grant program, although with a slightly tighter schedule. However, the funder has indicated the desire for the project to be completed by September 2023, which may impact the funder's decision. In terms of the financial analysis, as in option 1, the technical specifications have been estimated to fall within the existing grant plus the existing district allocation of $980,000, inclusive of costs absorbed and a 20% contingency. A lower contingency was used in this option as we have recent and confirmed pricing for this very, very similar project. And there's no location move. The IRR for this project is around 17% with a payback of about 6 years. Here we have the schedule again. And the important date to note for council here is that it's a completion date of March 2024. And again, the funder is looking for a completion date of September 2024, although, 2023, pardon me. Although the grant program is still open to the end of March 2024. Option 3. In option 3, the solar and BESS components would be reduced and relocated to a new site. So same as option 2, but at a different location. The project achieves the original vision for the project at a reduced size, and our owner's engineer is recommending a size of 0.4 megawatts to 0.6 megawatts for the solar, and for the BESS, 1 megawatt to 2 megawatts, with 2 megawatt hours to 3 megawatt hours draw capacity. We estimate that this is achievable within budget. On to pros and cons. Pros side, keeps the original vision of the project intact. The RFP technical specs could mostly be reused. Smaller footprint, requiring less civil work. The original project location is available for other projects. This last pro is actually a con, so just a misprint there, should be on the con side, and that's schedule slippage because of the site process, relocating the site. On the con side, will require a new level 1 and 2 environmental study, possible archaeological studies, as well as permitting processes, fire hazard assessments, environmental permitting, et cetera, all costing time and money. Less power generation from the solar functionality because the solar is reduced in size. The smaller system size may introduce more bidders into the process, which could slow the bid process down. Peak shaving will be reduced with the smaller battery system. It is likely going to be a major scope change for the grant funder, as when we spoke to them, they did say that a change in location would specifically trigger a major change, or likely to trigger a major change. And the site-specific information will need to be rewritten into the RFP, so much of that work would have to be done before we can get an RFP out. Grant impacts, in preliminary discussions with the funder has indicated change in location will likely result in a major classification change. In terms of the anticipated project completion date, it is anticipated this project will be completed in December 2024, which is beyond the end date of the program. It is therefore assumed that the feasibility of this option is decreased as the funder is likely to deny the grant reallocation due to the timeline. As in the first two options, technical specifications are estimated to be contained entirely within the $6 million grant, plus the $980 allocated from the district. There is a 20% contingency on this project. Financials are similar to options 3, for option 3 as in option 2. However, there is an increased civil scope as this will be dependent on the chosen location, the additional costs for environmental and other non-electrical studies. However, these costs were not included and are assumed to be absorbed in the 20% contingency. Option 3 would allow for maximum area for other uses in the original location. The IRR is 17%, about 17%, and with a payback of about 6 years. Here's the schedule details, similar to option 2, with the addition of a rigorous location selection process of 8 months at the start, which would need to be completed in order to write the RFP. Option 4. In this final option, the BESS component is the main feature of the installation. Alongside this BESS would be a small solar installation that is designed in such a way that is expandable as part of a community solar garden feature. With intention to expand, other components would be overbuilt, such as oversized power system connections, footprint, expandable ready fencing, future panel layout designed, etc. The concept of this option is to focus grant funding on the upfront costs in order to make future expansion options as cost-effective as possible. A community-ready solar garden is envisioned to be part of the project. This would enable residents to own a panel at the solar garden and benefit from electrical generation. This would work for both residents that don't have space or the ability to install solar panels on their private properties. And for those who have the ability to do so, it is envisioned to be a lower cost per kilowatt hour generation as compared to developing on your private property. This option provides some electrical efficiencies and positions our electric utility well in the face of increased distributed generation while giving our customers options not currently available to them. Our owner's engineer has reviewed this option and expect that the sizing of 0.2 megawatts to 0.3 megawatts on the solar side, so that's a small solar system, with a BESS of 1 to 2 megawatts, 3 to 3.5 megawatt hours would be achievable within budget. So pros and cons. Reduced civil scope for the BESS. This is on the pro side. We have a reduced civil work for the BESS and reduced civil work for the solar. Simpler design and execution. Fewer unknowns for the solar and the grid grid controller. Could be placed at different location entirely because of the smaller battery footprint. Peak shaving and cost savings could still be achievable as the battery will charge during off-peak hours and discharge to save on our peak. Cons. Uses energy from the grid for heating and cooling of the batteries. So there's no substantial solar generation here, and so the losses associated with peak shaving would be borne by the community. Much harder to showcase as a district asset in collective ownership by residents. So the solar garden component would be considered sort of owned by individuals plus the district, so maybe hard to communicate that to our residents. Not considered a renewable option because majority of it is on the BESS side. There are, with the solar garden concept, there are the complexities of agreements and the solar garden program and how we would develop that and how we would implement that. So there's a lot of unknowns there and a lot of questions to be answered in our discovery of how that program would operate. We also have no firm number of residents that would participate in the program to date. With the grant, it's anticipated that this change in scope would be classified as major and would require additional discussions from the grant funder. In terms of the project timeline, the estimated project completion date is December 27th, 2024. So that's the end of 2024, which is beyond the program date. It is therefore expected that this option will result in the funder not approving the reallocation of the funding due to the timelines. In terms of the financials, as in all options, the technical specifications are estimated to be contained entirely within the $6 million grant, plus the existing $980,000 allocated from the district. with a 25% contingency. The IRR is about 17% with a payback of almost 8 years. Here's the detailed schedule. And I'll just note for council that the completion date is shown as December 2024. And just another detail that I neglected to mention in previous slides, there is the red vertical line shown in these schedules. And that red vertical line is the date at which the gas tax funding is completed. So you can see that this project does go past that date. And that red line is in all of those schedule slides. The 4 options presented all account for a de-scoped project to be completed within the $6 million grant funding. The district's sole capital financial commitments remain to be $980,000. Based on the projected energy cost savings and anticipated O&M costs, all 4 options have a positive net present value. Should council wish to move forward with any of those 4 options, we have prepared preliminary motions for council's consideration shown here on this slide. And we're on to questions.
On to questions. Councillor Carlson and then Councillor Barkwell and then Holmes.
That was fun. Thank you. My question is, when you were working on coming up with options, was there conversation around maybe a combination of option 2 and option 4, considering the eco village and the potential build out of that area?
We didn't discuss that particular combination, although that is an option. It's something that could be done, and it's something we could potentially bring forward to council with some more detail later on, or council could ask for that today, and we could look at moving something like that forward.
Councillor Barkwell.
Yeah, I guess my questions relate to options 3 and 4. Option 4, when I saw it's titled Community Ready Solar Garden, I was thinking in terms of you would build out the infrastructure, the 25,000 volt lines or whatever, 3-phase power to the location, but not necessarily build any solar panels until people have signed up and whatever, or the district saw that it's 5-6 years down the road and an investment in solar panels would be worthwhile for ourselves. But is it suggesting that the community involvement, such as the Nelson model, is an integral part of this proposal, that we would, it's not sort of something that could be done in the future, but it's something that we're going to do? Number 4.
Through the mayor, the way the option is written is we would have a solar installation and all the associated electrical connection to our electrical system, transformers, et cetera, would be there on site. The amount of solar panels we would expect to be something under an acre, maybe a couple rows of solar panels. So it is something you can, see, feel, and touch. And then the expansion would be lower cost because all that infrastructure is in place and you can just go ahead and expand on that. So we do envision it as something installed now that residents of Summerland can see, and then, but smaller, quite a bit smaller. Whereas the original project had 5 acres of panels planned. This is much, maybe a fifth of the size of that, and then we could expand in the future and offer a program in the future. Although we are envisioning the project would pay for development of the program.
So
Follow-up question?
Or just a comment, I mean, I really like the idea that the grant pays for the infrastructure to a location where expansion is a possibility, because although it's not financially feasible at this time, there will be a day when we will, if you have a lot of available land, want to consider, appropriate space, solar. So if we can get the grant money to pay for the infrastructure to a location like that, then I think it's a real win. But that's a comment or an opinion, not a question.
Councillor Trainer, I'll go to you after Councillor Holmes. Your question, Councillor Holmes?
Yes, thank you. Would it be possible to go to the funder with a couple options or multiple options and say, these are the things that we're looking at, this is what we'd like to do, and then have them tell us, well, this one's a major, this one's a minor, so then if we prefer the one that they say is a major, let them go ahead and refer it, but knowing that we have in our back pocket the minor already approved. Is that, or would that work?
Graham?
So we could, yeah, thank you through the mayor, Councillor Holmes. It'd be good to narrow the field a little bit more than 4 options to go to the funder. That first one window of contact we have with the funder, they would be giving us their best guess, gut instinct feel on major or minor as well. So we won't really know until that management committee makes a final determination, but we could take a couple options hypothetically, or maybe even 3, and have some dialogue. I think they have been pretty open to working with us on a dialogue basis. But again, it'd be with the intention, even in that conversation, of further narrowing it down to what might be, the key one we take forward to the management committee. I don't think, based on the conversations we had, they'd be comfortable with us putting multiple options to the management committee ultimately, potentially, if they were, say, all potentially major options.
So 2 might be feasible then. And then just follow up on that. So would going past the project completion date, would that also be part of the funder's consideration when they're reviewing these options? Because if we're not the only ones in the same boat, then I think that deadline might be extended to a lot of people. No.
If I may, yeah, thank you, Madam Mayor, and through to Councillor Holmes. There's sort of a soft date and hard date, I guess, is the way I would think of it, and they're strongly desirous of a September 2023 soft completion date for any projects. None of these projects will actually achieve that in the options that we have before you on the soft date. The hard date, where really everything needs to be wrapped up, reported, fiscal year end of theirs in 2024, that's a really hard date. I don't think they would permit us to go beyond that March 31st. There would be no special dispensation there, because in those senior governments, that money rolls back to Treasury Board at that time, and so they wouldn't be able to. And that's one of the reasons why also we kind of flagged throughout some of these. The further we get away from the soft date, the more nervous they'll be getting, because if they feel there could be project slippage or there's some level of complexity because of supply chains and everything, they might be worried that we can deliver. And if they would want to know that sooner rather than later, to possibly reallocate those monies if we did, in fact, have to say we can't complete or we won't complete. So just, I guess it's a long-winded way to say there's sort of that soft date, but then there's a hard date. They won't let us go past the March 31, 2024.
Councillor Trainer?
The CAO just kind of answered a couple of my questions. I think if we were to go back to the funder with a couple options, the first question is to ask how firm they are on the timeline, because if they have very, definite ideas about that, then that kind of eliminates some of these options right away. But my other question was to Jeremy. Between option 1 and 2, which one, do you know the difference between the peak shaving savings? Because I think option 2 or option 1, I can't remember, one of them allows a bit more savings. Do you know the difference between the two?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Trainer, through the mayor. Option 1 has the largest battery energy storage system, so the most peak shaving. I don't have the exact numbers right here, but maybe we can have a look at that. Oh, it's in there. So we'll just grab those numbers for you as we're getting on with questions. But the option 1 is the larger battery system, and the option 2 is the smaller battery system. So definitely more peak shaving with option 1.
Okay, but you don't have an amount. Like, we don't have a difference, do we? Or is it in the report? And
Yes, it's in the report.
It is?
Has
Okay.
here. Go ahead, Dave.
Yes.
Yeah, through the mayor. So option 1 provides estimated annualized cost savings of $279,000 or $279,946. And option 2 provides for $194,441. And then I guess option 3 would be the same, $194,441. And option 4, $192,111.
Councillor Barkwell and then Councillor Van Elfen.
So do I understand it correctly after hearing what our CEO had to say and how firm they are with the way government works, March 31st, 2024, option 3 and 4 are not really options at all? Because they go way past the date.
Through the mayor, that's correct, Councillor Barkwell. And you may recall I mentioned that in my opening remarks on slide 1 for that reason. We did build all the options in the great hope that all of them would be entirely feasible. But when we actually came down to the short strokes of building the construction timelines, it quickly was revealed some of those construction timelines will be too challenging. So really, it's an option 1 or an option 2 in the options that we've prepared rather.
Okay, thank you. It's nice to know that you thought about these things, and then this was the reason why they're not, entirely feasible, or else we'd be asking you, why didn't vote this? And then it looks to me like option 2, even it's kind of risky. So, okay, I don't have any questions.
Thank you. Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Question through to Jeremy, if I may. On option 1, you mentioned that it would be staff's prerogative, so to speak, where you want to locate this. But if it was located in a certain location and funding came along in the future, could we add solar, like to a rooftop? If it was, at a location where there's a building, let's say, like Public Works or something like that, could we put an array of solar on top of that roof to feed into the battery storage in the future? I just asking the question. I have no clue.
Thank you for asking that question, Councillor Van Elfen. Through the mayor, thank you for bringing that up again, because we did want to just stress that that option is laid out where staff is going to choose a location. So just be 100% clear on that because of the short timelines. And just to further that, the battery energy storage system and the solar systems do not need to be co-located. So we may choose, say it's a public work yard, just for conversation's sake. Say we have a couple C-cans there for batteries. We can, and if there's a future grant opportunity to build solar, we can still build solar. It doesn't have to be at the public works yard. It could be anywhere that has, there is associated costs with connecting to the system, et cetera, but we go through the same selection process, I would imagine.
Follow-up question?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just a quick follow-up. You mentioned a couple times more bidders could delay the bid process, but could it not sharpen their pencils too? The more bidders, the more competitive pricing?
Thank you. Through the mayor, yes. Yep.
Councillor Holmes?
Thank you. Yeah, I'm okay with staff selecting option one as long as they keep the aesthetics and the beauty of the community in mind and don't plunk it in the middle of Memorial Park or something like that. My question is also on the bidding, and it's noted in option 2 that ATCO recommends a sizing range in the RFP rather than the value, or is that the budget? So does that mean that they don't recommend saying we've got $6 million, what can we get for it? And if that's the correct thinking, then why is that recommendation as it is?
Thank you, Councillor Holmes, through the mayor. So just to focus on that option 2 here, I'll just read it out again. It's a solar system that is 0.4 to 0.6 megawatts and a battery energy storage system that is 1 to 2 megawatts with power capacity of 2 to 3 megawatt hours. And it's a combination of what you mentioned. So the RFP could be written in such a way that here's the size range, and maybe they can get up to the top end of that range and be within the 6 million. We expect that at the highest point of that range, it might be a little over 6. And then at the lower end, we come in under. So we think the range is wide enough that the bidders can give us the largest system for the budget that we have. So we would show them this is our budget and we'd like you to have something proposed to us within this size range, fully spending our budget. Yeah, so it's a bit of a combination there.
Councillor Barkwell and then actually I'll go to you, Councillor Patton, because we haven't heard from you first, and then Councillor Barkwell. Thank you, Councillor Barkwell.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm keen on option 1. I think that our payback is there, and I think that the only thing that I would change is that there isn't all that many places that you can set a couple 40-foot containers. So whether it be the water treatment plant, the sewer treatment plant, the public yard, Sadie at there, I still think that council should have the opportunity of knowing where you want to set the units and not totally be a total staff discretion as what was mentioned. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Barkwell.
I was going to speak along the same lines as Councillor Holmes and Patton here. I'm okay with staff using their discretion on a location. Perhaps we might have some sort of veto, as long as the Sadie location is not one of the ones considered, because as far as I'm concerned, that's a prime location, our main entrance into town. We don't need more transformers and wires and CCAN buildings there. We need something a little bit more, with all due respect to the electrical department, something a little bit more aesthetically pleasing than electrical works on that area. So if there is any other place than that, I'm happy, other than Memorial Park.
Okay, this is the time for asking questions of staff. And when we get to selecting our, yes, thank you. All right, Graham, you had something to add?
Yeah, for a point of clarity, yeah, with council, we haven't become intoxicated with power or anything. We're concerned of the timeline on an involved back and forth public consultation on what's really just a couple of CCANs. So we would be, looking at safety and looking at district lands and what makes sense and aesthetics and all those things, and would absolutely still come back and tell council where we're intending to place these things. We wouldn't be hiding that information. We'd be looking to do that quickly and with our own discretion to save time on a short runway.
Yes, because sometimes it takes us a long time to make a decision. Councillor Carlson.
I have a question about the actual batteries themselves. Do you know how much cobalt is in these batteries, or if it's a major component in these batteries?
Thank you, Councillor, through the mayor. Well, because we'll be going out for RFP again, we actually don't know what the battery chemistry is at this point. So it may contain that, it may not. But if council's interested in some information on that, when we go through the RFP process, we could bring something like that forward.
I think it's very important to recognize that there are parts of the world where mining for stuff that goes into these batteries is probably a lot more damaging than whether or not we're saving a few $100,000 a year. And I know that's a completely different conversation, but it's not something that we've talked about, and it's become a lot more apparent in recent times. There's been lots of news about atrocities in the Congo. So I do think it's important to recognize that this could also be perhaps it's not as good idea as we may think it is. So thank you, Jeremy.
Okay, any other questions? Changed your mind? Okay. Okay, I just have, I should have written down my question. Oh, so my understanding from the information that we got from you, and that's in our agenda, is that of the 4 options, the only potentially minor one is option 2, and the other 3 are probably major. And that significant, maybe not significant, maybe I shouldn't use that word, that will has some bearing, some weight on whether or not the funder would proceed with the grant money. Graham?
Well, just point of clarity on there, Madam Mayor. So really, it would just be which committee makes that decision, because the technical committee can only make decisions on what they perceive to be minor. But even if it's considered major, there's a process for evaluating major and still making a positive decision. That just has to go, it takes about an extra month, and it'll go to a management committee. And while there's the benefit of being minor to the funder potentially, the flip side is, with option 1, it might be considered a major change, but it can be done in a quicker timeline with better payback. So I think the funder will look at both sides of that and make that ultimate determination what they fund.
Thank you for that. Okay, if there aren't any other questions, I will go to Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The council directs staff to proceed with option 1 as outlined in the report from the Director of Utilities dated December 13th, 2021.
Seconder, Councillor Barkwell. Okay, time for discussion. Councillor Barkwell.
Yeah, Councillor Carlson was speaking about the environmental hazards of batteries, and she's quite correct. There are harmful components of batteries and very harmful components of solar panels, and that's why our hydropower is probably, that exists today, is probably the greenest and best power to use our hydro capacity until it's no longer there. And then perhaps we might consider additional solar capacity. And the solar panels contain telluride, all sorts of things that I can't even pronounce. So if we don't need to be doing them, I would think that the peak shaving, which would save the construction of hydro lines and stuff by reducing the total capacity, would be the way to go. Also, I like the idea of the battery storage because it's a little bit more innovative. There's already a ton of solar out there, but the battery storage and peak shaving is something that needs to be developed yet. And here we have, at little or no cost to us, a chance to be part of that.
Thank you, Councillor Barkwell. Councillor Van Elfen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I do really appreciate Councillor Carlson's comments earlier about what's going on in other countries in the mining of these rare materials to make these batteries. And I know they're working on different components daily. There's all sorts of different new methods out there that I'm hoping that'll work for the future. The question I have, if I may, over to our Director of Utilities, is with the battery storage, if we down the road looked at a small hydroelectric system, let's say turbines in the water lines or a turbine at Thirst Dam, could that be funneled into the battery storage? Liquidated into the?
Thank you, Councillor, through the mayor. Well, the answer is yes. But just to make it clear or more muddy or whatever, the analogy I use quite often is it's the punch bowl. So if you have some generation from, say, in-pipe turbines, it's going into the punch bowl. And then the battery energy storage system is taking some energy out of that punch bowl. Also going into that punch bowl is all the power we buy from the electric wholesaler, individuals who have solar on their homes or businesses. They're all putting into the punch bowl. So we're kind of dipping out of the punch bowl into the battery system, and then we're putting back into the punch bowl from the battery system. So yes, it's technically correct to say we can, but it's a little more convoluted than that.
So you're thinking at Eisentalk then? No.
Councillor Holmes.
Yeah, thank you. I don't think we really know what the funder is going to say. They could come back with absolutely anything, and they could come back, if we just go with just option one, they could come back, say, no, it's got nothing, it's nothing like the original project, and just reject it outright. And then we're left with having to revisit the whole thing again. I think we have nothing to lose by keeping our options open and going forward with two options and saying, this is what we're looking at. We're looking at option one and option two here, and asking the funder what they think about both of those. And hearing what the funder has to say about both of those, I think would give us a lot of insight on how to proceed and which one. So I don't like the motion where we're just looking at one. I'd prefer that we go forward to the funder with both options, one and two. And I just think that would be the better way forward. Thanks.
Councillor Carlson.
I agree with Councillor Holmes.
Councillor Barkwell.
Certainly, we don't want to limit ourselves. I'm just wondering if there's an advantage to, I don't think we can say, well, we like both of these options, you pick, you decide. I think we have to go in with a preferred option, and in the alternative, this, option B, maybe, and I don't know how we sort of get to that point.
I think we can get to that point by deciding whether or not we accept the motion that is currently on the floor. And then if that is defeated, then we can talk more about another motion that may come up, perhaps through Councillor Holmes, and then go from there. So could you hold your discussion until we get to that point? Thank you. So any further discussion on option one, which is the motion that's on the floor right now? I'll call the question. All in favor? Opposed? So that is defeated for 3-4. Councillor Holmes, yes, go ahead, please.
I'll move that council direct staff to proceed with options 1 and 2 as outlined in the report from the Director of Utilities dated December 13th, 2021.
Okay, and we know your reasoning for bringing that forward. Councillor Barkwell. Thank you, Councillor Traynor. We don't have a seconder yet. Councillor Carlson. Councillor Barkwell.
Well, it doesn't address the question of, do we put forward a preferred option to the committee? That was my point. Yeah.
Right. So here's your opportunity to strengthen your suggestion, however you feel, and then we can discuss that as well.
I could propose an amendment to the motion that reads that or in addition to the motion, that the of the two options, option one be presented as the preferred option and option two be presented as the alternative option. And then we could vote on that amendment.
First, I'll ask if that would be a friendly amendment that you would entertain, Councillor Holmes, or if it doesn't speak to the intent of your motion.
Not really. I have questions on that.
Yep. Okay. I'll get back to you in a second. Councillor Traynor.
My question is for our CAO. Can we submit two options? Like, is that something that they'd even consider? Did you already answer that? I can't remember.
Yeah, I don't think the process is so prescriptive that it would tell us how to write the letter we write. Because ultimately what this has to boil down to is correspondence from us, formal correspondence from us on a request basis to the funder describing what precisely we're doing. First of all, tools down on what we were doing before, and here's what we're thinking of doing. So, you know, there's a couple ways that we could frame it. The first way is we could, through the verbal discussion with our first point of contact with the funder, test, I mean, as what the motion is currently on the floor, we could test both options. And then they could, you know, depending on how that conversation went, they might have strong indications, oh, you'll experience extreme headwinds on this, success on that, or they might say something like, oh, it's a toss-up either way. Actually, we disagree that that's a minor, that'll probably be a major, you know, depending. So that first conversation can be very enlightening. And then ultimately what goes into the final letter, I think we have to be pretty careful what exactly it is. Because I think if there was any sense of confusion on the wind, that is in the funder's part, to say, that doesn't seem like these guys really know what they want, right? I think that's where we have to be a bit careful. It seems like all they're trying to do is find a way to keep the money that we gave them and spend it. They don't even, we could tell them to, you know, make a popsicle stand, you know, so they will be listening very carefully to what's in the correspondence and how strong and confident we are in that. And so once it comes to actually writing that, you probably would want to have a preferred option, in my personal opinion. But at the end of the day, the first conversation, I think we have some latitude as to how we frame it with them.
Yeah, I like what you just said. I like your approach. I think, first of all, have a conversation with them and see if they would be open to even hearing like the two, and then go from there. But I do think that we should have a preferred option. Just that shows that we've had a discussion and that like we aren't just, like you said, trying to keep the money, that we've thought this through and that we have an idea. But that we would like, you know, we'd like to make something work for Summerland. But I do think that we should try to submit one if we can, with a backup one, but having a preferred one. And I just think it shows that we've thought it through.
Jeremy.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Just want to throw in there for council's consideration that in our schedules, we've laid it out like this, where we apply to the grant funder and we allow a 2 to 3 month period for that to get worked out. In parallel with that, we're writing the RFPs so that we're ready to go out. So a 2-option approach would mean we are working on 2 other RFPs in the background. There's some additional costs associated with that. If we were to not receive the grant funding and maybe say the project was to end, we would likely be or potentially be on the hook for some of that cost there. So yeah, just throwing that out there for consideration.
Yeah, that's a good point. Just a sec. Councillor Holmes, did you have your hand up? I can't.
Yeah, so we have that initial discussion, and I don't think in that initial discussion we necessarily want to show our hand, so to speak, that we say we're thinking about these things, and I think we don't, it's really hard for us, if we don't know what the funder is going to come back with those 2 things, I don't know how we can then decide what our preferred option is, because they might say something that might change our way of thinking. So but I understand what the others are saying, and that you ideally you want to have a preferred option. I just don't know what that option would be without hearing from what the funders have to say. That's just the way I'm coming from it. But you know, so I would favor just going to the funder, getting that initial discussion, then coming back to us, hearing what the funders had to say, and then deciding which our option is that we want to pursue.
I'll go to you first, Graham, and then to Councillor Barkwell, and then Councillor Carlson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through to Councillor Holmes. Yeah, we could do that. So I think we could have that verbal discussion on a couple of options and then report back to council. I think it's a reasonable approach, and we'll put council in a better position to pick a final option to formally move forward with that additional information. The, you know, one reality with that is it will add time, but it may be time well spent, and in any case, we'll all have a better understanding based on that first conversation where exactly we stand with the funder on either of those options.
Yeah, and then if we're able to choose a single option, that will help with cost down the road in Jeremy's department. Okay, thank you, Graham. To you, Councillor Barkwell.
Yeah, okay, so in light of what the CAO and Jeremy have just said, I see that it's an option I didn't realize we had, that they could have this informal discussion and, you know, further enlighten us as to which way we might want to go. So I see it's not as pressing as it was. I didn't realize there was sort of a little bit of time built in to this process that they had already planned in.
Councillor Carlson.
Just put something out there because it's what I'm thinking about. The current grant contract states the project scope as follows: a 1 megawatt solar array with 2 megawatt battery storage, including modules, inverters, racking, battery storage modules, electrical structural balance of systems, components, example, wiring, switches, etc., connections and integrations to existing systems, and site preparations, foundations, and related works. So the only thing that would have to change if we went with option 2 was two numbers. No, it was one number. Instead of 1 megawatt, it would be 0.5 megawatt solar array, and the rest of it would be exactly the same. Is that correct? I mean, if I look at the numbers, it's basically scaled down to 0.5 megawatt of solar, and the battery numbers are still the same. And so I guess I'm just putting it out there to council that that's not that big of a change, and perhaps would be a simple conversation to be had with a funder.
Graham?
The nature of option 2 is such that we believe it would be considered a minor by the funder.
Okay, so right now on the floor, we're debating 1 and 2, options 1 and 2. Is there any further discussion on this? I'm a little, go ahead, Councillor Barkwell.
Could you remind me exactly what the motion reads?
Kendra?
So the motion Councillor Holmes put forward on the floor was that council directs staff to proceed with option 1 and 2 as outlined in the report from the Director of Utilities dated December 13th, 2021. Now, Councillor Barkwell, if you were going to go with your amendment that you did put forward.
It was never seconded.
It was never seconded, so we have that main motion on the floor.
So that's what we're talking about, and the question will be called in a minute. I'm kind of two minds. I like the option of having two options discussed with the funder, not particularly formally, but just kind of getting a sense. But at the same time, I think that Councillor Carlson raises a very good question. a very good statement that there really isn't too much change other than reduced scope for option 2. And we've heard from staff that that probably is the only one of the options that will be considered major. Now, we don't know for sure, but that's the feeling around the table with staff. So, I'm not really sure how I'm going to vote on this one, whether we look at entertaining another motion or if this one gets carried. So I just wanted to give my take on it. Okay, anyone else? I'll call the question on options 1 and 2 and that discussion, and then coming back to council again. That's the intent of yours, yeah. All in favor? Opposed? Okay, so that carries unanimously. So that's how we'll proceed. Thank you. Go ahead, Graham.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. What we will endeavor to do, given the tight timelines that we're all aware of in relation to project success, is we'll try to get a hold of funder even before Christmas. And if we're able to do that, even in the next week, what we could try to do is report back to council on the 17th of December, because I think there's a council meeting on the 17th of December for a minor matter to do with utility rate approvals. If that's amenable to council, we could try to do that just to get you the quickest information possible and possibly some further clarity even before the Christmas period.
Does that sound good, council? We're meeting anyways on Friday. Okay, good. We have a break scheduled now. We're way over time, but how about till 3:10? So just under 8 minutes.